What if I told you that Donald Trump has been using the exact same negotiation strategy for over 50 years? A strategy that is so ruthless that business schools don't teach it, and most negotiation experts won't even acknowledge that it exists. But by the end of this video, I'll reveal what I believe to be the most accurate name for Trump's unique negotiation framework, something that he's never explicitly labeled himself. Hey everyone, welcome to my road studio. I'm on the road for a keynote, but I had this idea for the video, so I wanted to make sure that I got it out. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. My name is Kwame Christian. I'm the founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, host of the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything, and adjunct professor at the Moritz College of Law, which is home to the top-ranked dispute resolution program in the country. And I wanted to make sure that we got all those credentials on the books because we're going to take all of that experience and use it to analyze Donald Trump's really unique and very controversial negotiation strategy. And just a quick side note before we jump in, the initial goal with this video was to analyze Trump's negotiation strategy as it applied to the trade war, but the reality is, as I was going through that, I realized I couldn't do it justice if I didn't fully articulate what Trump's negotiation strategy is, because it's really unique and we won't be able to fully understand how it applies to the trade war until we get it out here. So I wanted to set that stage because that's the next video that's coming down the road, because we're going to talk about how the strategy applies to the trade war, but then, like a professor, I'm going to give him a grade. We're going to see how he did. And if you have any questions or comments that you want to make sure that we address in the next video, make sure to leave a comment in this video. And of course, like and subscribe if you like this video, because maybe we'll give you a shout out in that next piece of content that we create. And now let's get to the analysis of Trump's strategy. Disclaimers here. First of all, this video is all about understanding one of the most powerful and controversial frameworks ever deployed in negotiation history. And it's a strategy that's taken someone from the pinnacle of business to the pinnacle of politics. And so my goal in this video is to create one of the most comprehensive, nonpartisan evaluations of Donald Trump's negotiation style. And it's an analysis that is not based in morals, ethics, or politics. It's solely based on negotiation strategy. Now, I understand that stylistically, it might not be what people prefer. Morally and ethically, it might raise some concerns. But for the purposes of this video, we are focusing exclusively on understanding the strategy, the tactics, the methodology, and evaluating the outcomes. It is a ruthlessly pragmatic evaluation of his negotiation style. Here's something really interesting about Trump's approach. So if you read The Art of the Deal, you'll recognize that it's primarily just a collection of stories with some advice sprinkled in there. And it's very different from other modern negotiation books where they will name their strategies, name their tactics, and then talk about how it would work in theory, then apply it to specific case studies. But that's not the way that he does it. And I think it would be really helpful if we kind of get a more organized, nuanced evaluation of his approach and his strategy and name some of his tactics so we can understand it. So you might want to use those strategies and tactics, or let's say you don't want to use those strategies. You can say, I still need to know what the strategies and tactics are so I can protect myself if somebody uses those strategies on me, right? So let's start off with a question that I love to ask my students and the people that we train at the American Negotiation Institute. I actually want you to pause this. Don't leave the video, okay? Don't do that. Just pause this and actually think through this answer. You have a choice going into a really big negotiation. You could either, let's say, red pill or blue pill. You could either have all of the negotiation skills in the world to use in that negotiation, or on the other side, you can have all of the power and leverage in the world. So all of the negotiation skills or all of the power and leverage. Which do you choose? Now, I get mixed responses with this, but let's think about it this way. If you have all of the power and leverage in the world, you don't need to have negotiation skills because you just steamroll people and take what you want, and there's nothing that people can do about it, right? It's really that simple. So for most people, they don't have all of the power and leverage in the world. So that means they have to focus on their negotiation skills, build relationships, and persuade and influence the other side. But if you happen to have so much power and leverage that skills don't matter, then that's really what you go for. And that's Trump's whole approach. He navigates the entirety of his career and persona driving towards the acquisition to as much power, leverage, and status as possible, because he will bring those as tools of influence at the negotiation table. That's the core of his framework. Now, let's break down what power and leverage really mean. So in order to understand this strategy, we need to understand power and leverage. So let's just give you a simple breakdown here. So power is official authority or control. So think about a judge who makes a decision. They have power to push things in a specific direction. A CEO within a company has power within that company, power over the other people in the company, right? It's a little bit clearer and easier to see. Now, the thing is with leverage is all about strategic advantage. So you don't necessarily need power in order to have leverage. So for example, let's say you are a supplier to a manufacturing company. The manufacturing company might be a multi-billion-dollar company. You might be worth hundreds of thousands or in low multi-millions. So there's a discrepancy between power, right? But you as the small supplier might have more leverage because you might produce the one thing that manufacturer needs to produce their product. So even though you're smaller, you have leverage because you have strategic advantage. So for Trump, his entire negotiation strategy is executed before the actual negotiation begins. His goal is to get as much power and as much leverage as possible, and those will be his two tools of influence at the negotiation table, which brings us to the negotiation strategy. What do we call this? I call this dominate and distance. So let's break this down. So let's think about some traditional negotiation strategies here. So we have win-win. So that's a collaborative approach where we say our goal is to have both parties achieve mutual gain. I recognize that by helping other people, they are more likely to help me, and it makes it more likely for me to achieve my objective. And for win-win, we don't even need to think about it from an ethical or moral perspective. We can just say you can be completely selfish and utilize the win-win methodology, because you could just say, well, listen, I don't necessarily want to help other people, but I recognize I have to because that's the only way I can be successful, right? I think we often look at it through a moral lens, but it's also a pragmatic approach too. But then you have some people who are win-lose, where their goal is to win at your expense. They're typically more aggressive with the way that they negotiate, and their goal is to win at the other party's expense. You want to maximize your own outcome, even if it means that the other side loses out. There might not even be an intent to hurt them, but if damage happens as a byproduct of your gain, so be it. But here's the thing. Trump takes this a step further, many steps further. And so when we think about the dominate and distance strategy, it's not just about winning. It's about winning in such a dominant fashion that the other party feels diminished, subordinated, and reluctant to challenge you again. The goal isn't parity, it's permanent position, top dog status every single time. So think about it. In a normal win-lose scenario, I take more of the pie and you get less. But in Trump's frame, it's not just about how much pie he takes. It's about making sure that you know that he has more, not just more value, but more power and more control. You don't just lose, you lose publicly and in a way that affirms his supremacy and your dependency. Now, here's the key insight that separates Trump's approach from traditional competitive negotiators. Most competitive negotiators focusing on maximizing their gains. Trump focuses on maximizing the power distance between himself and his counterpart. So let me explain with a really simple, concrete example using very simple numbers. So let's say in a win-win scenario, both parties might walk away with $80 each, creating a total of $160 of total value through the spirit of collaboration. Now, in a typical win-lose scenario, a competitive negotiator might secure $70 for themselves while leaving $30 to their counterpart, which only creates $100 of total value. But Trump's approach is different. He would prefer to walk away with $60 if it means that his counterpart only gets $5, which creates $65 in total value, but establishes a power distance of $55. So the gap between him and his counterpart is far greater than in any of the other scenarios. So in many cases, he chooses this outcome rather than collaborating to get more for himself because the dominance established is more valuable to him than the extra dollars. But why is that? Because the gap itself is valuable in his perspective. By widening the differential, Trump ensures that the other party recognizes his dominance. It creates a psychological advantage that extends beyond the current deal into future interactions. And in this framework, subordination itself is an asset. And it's something that he actively builds into his strategy. He'd rather take a hit himself if it means that you get hurt worse. And why is that? And it's because pain creates compliance, and compliance creates simplicity. He doesn't want mutual cooperation. He wants unilateral control. He wants the other side to learn that fighting him and fighting back isn't worth it. And once they learn that lesson, they submit forever. And future negotiations become far easier because the other party self-regulates. And that's efficiency through domination. So let's bring in his own words. So in his book, Think Big and Kick Ass, he says, when someone screws you, you fight back hard. You hit them so hard that they will never try again. The point isn't just to win. The point is to win so decisively that future resistance becomes futile. This is strategic subordination, a form of psychological anchoring at the level of status. The win is not complete and secured until the gap between Trump and his counterpart has widened so much that the counterpart's only rational future is to fall in line or avoid confrontation altogether. And if you think about it from a strategic lens, not an ethical one, there's a certain cold logic to it. Trump is building a portfolio of relationships where he doesn't need to manage the other person's emotions. He doesn't need to negotiate with any kind of nuance. He just applies consistent pressure and expects compliance and moves on. And in his world, that is scalable. It works for him. He doesn't want partnerships, he wants submission. And for his specific goals, that approach has worked, not morally, but tactically. Now let's talk about the psychological underpinnings of this approach. It really stems from a place of vigilance, a place of hyper awareness of potential exploitation that drives preemptive aggression. Remember this crucial insight, okay? Every accusation is an admission. So when Trump repeatedly says, others are taking advantage of us, they're ripping us off, they're treating us unfairly, he's revealing his own worldview. He's providing a window into his own strategic mindset. So as I've analyzed his negotiations, I've recognized that for Trump, he's constantly thinking about ways to maximize his opportunities and win at other people's expense. And critically, he assumes that other people are going to do the same to him. So this makes him hyper vigilant and strategically paranoid. This is what he actually says in his book. He says, you have to assume that everyone's out to get you because most of the time they are. Protect yourself first, always. This is his worldview from The Art of the Deal, and it explains so much about his approach. And he reinforces this in another book he wrote called Think Big and Kick Ass. People will take advantage of you if you let them. I never let them. I'm always watching. I'm always ready. In Trump's mind, if he were to adopt a win-win strategy, he would only be empowering his opponent. And for him, he does not want to give his opponent the tools of his own demise. He believes that if he negotiates in a way that empowers the other party, he's actually creating the instruments of his own future subordination to a more powerful former ally. And this vigilance makes Trump comfortable with accepting less for himself if it creates the power distance between him and his opponent. If his opponent is weaker relative to him, he feels safer. But I want to be clear, when I'm talking about fear and hypervigilance in this context, I'm not diminishing the approach. When you think about the most successful people in the world, they're typically the ones who carry the most productive fear. I'm afraid of losing, and that makes me motivated to work harder on winning. If I'm afraid that someone else is training harder, champions use that mentality to push themselves to go further. And for the most aggressive negotiators, the bullies who are out there, they're often the most strategically vigilant, not in a manner of weakness, but in a manner of tactical anticipation. Trump is always the biggest, baddest bully in negotiations because he wants to strike fear in other people, and he assumes that others want to do the same to him, which amplifies his aggression to ensure that people don't do to him what he intends to do to them. He sees everything as a zero-sum battle, and in his worldview, negotiation is not a game of chess. It's a demonstration of dominance. And people who misunderstand that, the people who think that they're walking into a conventional negotiation, are the ones who are already at a significant strategic disadvantage. Now let's look at the specific tactics that Trump employs within his framework. Tactic number 1, relentless persistence. Trump has extraordinary pain tolerance in negotiations. When faced with resistance, a lot of people will eventually relent. At some point, people give up and say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm done. But Trump does not. When you look at his books and the reports of people who have been in the unfortunate position of negotiating against him, he just does not stop. When he has the advantage, he pushes it as far as he can. When he does not have the advantage, he fights so hard that people simply give up because he recognizes that he will always be more invested in his own success and survival than you will be invested in his failure and demise. And he will just outwork and survive longer than other people in really, really tough circumstances. And we're seeing a little bit of this in the trade war talks. But again, we'll deal with that in the next video. So don't take it from me, take it from him. So he actually has a book titled Never Give Up. And one of the quotes quotes is, "You've got to be willing to take a hit and keep on going. The people who succeed are the ones who don't quit, no matter how bad it gets." And he doubles down on this in Think Big and Kick Ass. "When I go after something, I go all out. I don't stop until I win, no matter what." Fight back hard is his ferocious creed. It's a level of aggression that obliterates the playbook of modern negotiators. When I evaluate the different great negotiators in modern negotiation history, let's just say like 80s on to this point, there's really no beast like Donald Trump when it comes to aggression. You'll never see another negotiation book that advocates for this type of behavior, and it gives him a strategic advantage because people just simply are not equipped to deal with that level of aggression. And again, in The Art of the Deal, he says, "When somebody screws you, you fight back hard. You hit them so hard that they will never try it again." It's not just retaliation. It is a relentless, bone-crushing vendetta that thrives on disproportionate levels of force. Trump can survive in extremely tough environments and situations and still keep on pushing while others get exhausted, frustrated, or give up. He just keeps on going. Where other people will quit, he will never stop, and he will keep on going. And he makes it abundantly clear that there is no end to his relentlessness until he gets his goal. The next tool or tactic that he uses a lot is maximizing the media for influence. This is something he has done exceptionally well for decades. Trump will weaponize the media to control the narrative and loom large in the minds of his opponents. So in The Art of the Deal, he says that the press is always hungry for a good story, and the more sensational, the better. If you do things that are bold and or controversial, the press will write about you. And Trump has consistently understood that media dominance translates directly into negotiation leverage by ensuring that he is always in the headlines. Even with controversial statements, he creates this psychological specter that haunts opponents at all times. You wake up, you read the news, there he is. He's always there. You cannot escape his shadow. And this tactic was most evident in his rise through the Republican primaries. He's using it again right now, but let's go back in 2016. Remember, he was an outsider. People were not giving him a chance, but I don't want to jump too far ahead because that's going to be one of our case studies. But let's get back to the strategy with the media, because his ability to manipulate the media coverage is unparalleled in modern politics. When you actually quantify how much it would have cost to pay for the same amount of exposure he got in the media for free, it would have been staggering. It's calculated into the billions of dollars, and it keeps on going. Billions of dollars of free media exposure. And this media dominance represents what I call psychological omnipresence. He makes opponents feel as though he is always watching, always present, always one step ahead. And by consistently and constantly being in their awareness through media coverage, he affects their decision making, even when he's not directly involved in a conversation. All right, here's another one. Strategic unpredictability. Unpredictability is really Trump's knockout punch. He keeps his adversaries perpetually off balance. So again, let's quote him in Think Big and Kick Ass. He says, "If they know what you're going to do, then they will outmaneuver you. I like to surprise people. It keeps me in control." This unpredictability isn't random. It is calculated to create confusion and prevents his opponents from developing counter strategies. So by consistently shifting positions, making sudden reversals, or by taking unexpected stances, Trump prevents others from finding solid ground from which to negotiate. So think of it as a form of psychological warfare. When you don't know what's coming next, you can't plan effectively. So you're forced to react rather than strategize. Your cognitive resources become depleted as you try to predict the unpredictable. So we saw this approach utilized throughout his entire business career and in his political life. He might express one position forcefully one day and then completely reverse that position the next day, right? And you see, even people on his team are confused. They don't know what's coming. So it has to be true randomness. And so this head-spinning approach keeps opponents off their game and diminishes their confidence and their ability to plan. So this unpredictability creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. Opponents eventually give up trying to predict or counter Trump's moves, and instead they focus on minimizing damage or finding ways to accommodate him or completely avoid him. So what appears to be chaotic to outsiders is actually a strategic application of unpredictability as a negotiation tactic. And it's critical to understand that for Trump, he does not care what you think about him. He doesn't care. So for most traditional negotiators, we care about reliability, we care about credibility, and we recognize that both of those things are fundamental to trust. We want our partners, our collaborators, and the person on the other side of the negotiation table, we want them to feel psychologically psychologically safe and feel as though there's some level of predictability. Trump flips that script. He does the complete opposite. So for Trump, this unpredictability itself becomes a form of leverage. It's a trump card, pun intended. It's a trump card that keeps people guessing and maintains a position of dominance. And here's another one, another tactic: disproportionate retaliation. So whenever he perceives a slight, his response is deliberately and strategically highly excessive. So in the dark, and I think I might have mentioned this one before, this is a long video, but again, in The Art of the Deal, he says, when someone screws you, fight back hard. You hit them so hard, they never want to try it again. This is foundational to the dominate and distance framework. It's not just responding to challenges, but crushing them with disproportionate force. The goal isn't to just win the current battle. It's to prevent all future battles through overwhelming them with a demonstration of severe consequences. You're not just beating this person into the ground, you're making everybody else afraid and say, like, I do not want those types of problems. So in my role at the American Negotiation Institute and as a professor, an adjunct professor, I have studied countless negotiators, but Trump's approach to retaliation is genuinely distinctive. He doesn't just push, he pulverizes. He will refuse to stop until the opponent is metaphorically buried. His aggression is a tsunami, it's not a wave. And the goal is to drown opponents with fear and submission. There's no other modern negotiator, business leader, or world leader that approaches these negotiations with this level of ferocity, right? This is unique and it works for him. It has worked for him. Again, politics and morals aside, we can recognize now this is an explicit strategy that he has documented over decades. His goal is to create public demonstrations of force that creates a ripple effect that is far beyond the immediate counterpart. And it's critical to understand that it is not always emotional retaliation. It's calculated. The disproportionate response is designed to establish dominance that creates fear and prevents future challenges. It's costly in the short term, but it creates efficiencies in the long term because people only need to go through this one time before they completely submit. And then the last point, and then we're going to roll into the case studies, is power and leverage, but also more importantly, finding leverage when he doesn't have power. He is acutely aware of the power dynamics and he is intent on creating leverage even from incredibly disadvantaged positions. He transforms weakness into strength by creating a broader perspective on what constitutes value. So he recognizes intangible assets like status, media attention, and reputation could really be just as valuable or sometimes even more valuable than objective financial success. So with that, let us get into these case studies. So the first case study we're going to look at is the Plaza Hotel. So the Plaza Hotel back in 1988, this was an iconic hotel he purchased for $407 million, mostly from borrowed money. And this deal illustrates Trump's ability to get leverage from a position of weakness. So the deal was not smooth. Eventually, he hit some financial troubles. He couldn't make the payments, and conventional wisdom would suggest that the banks in that situation held all the power. But Trump understood a crucial principle. If you owe the bank $100,000, then you have a problem. But if you owe the bank hundreds of millions of dollars and you can't pay, then the bank has a problem. So Trump used Chapter 11 bankruptcy to restructure, and that allowed him to negotiate with the creditors while still maintaining control of the property and of the deal to a large extent. And now this is the fascinating part. He was able to turn this financial setback into a strategic win for his brand and his status, because essentially the banks became unwilling co-conspirators in building Trump's brand. This is critical in understanding the approach, because even though they were frustrated by his inability to make the payments, they had no choice but to maintain the plaza's prestigious image and, by extension, Trump's image in order to sell the property at the highest possible price. The banks were forced to continue associating Trump's brand with luxury, with status, and success, even though he was going through all of these financial troubles, which further cemented his status as a top-tier real estate developer doing big things in the toughest real estate market in the world. Now, even though Trump eventually sold the property in in 1995 for $325 million, which was a substantial financial loss. He leveraged the situation to increase his name recognition and status through the process. These intangible but invaluable assets became leverage for his future deals. So his expansive view of value, seeing beyond the immediate financial outcomes to status, reputation, and media attention, gives Trump a significant advantage in negotiations. Most importantly, this status building through high-profile deals like the Plaza Hotel directly led to opportunities like The Apprentice, which catapulted his public image and name recognition to unprecedented levels. Without the Plaza Hotel deal and similar ventures like this, it's really questionable whether or not he would have secured the Apprentice role that later became a crucial foundation for his political leverage. So through this process, Trump demonstrated that he could use even a financial loss as a tool to increase his overall status and power by framing deals in ways that were complementary to his brand. The banks and the media remained invested in his narrative of personal success because it served their interests too, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of status enhancement, which brings us to the Republican National Convention. So in 2016, when we look at the primaries, I think this is an even more striking example of his negotiation strategies and his use of leverage and transforming that into power. So remember, Trump was an outsider. Nobody expected him to win. And when he entered the race, he lacked institutional power within the Republican Party. The establishment actively opposed him, with figures like Jeb Bush and Reince Priebus representing traditional party leadership. The key insight here is that Trump never attempted to persuade the establishment through conventional means. Unlike traditional politicians who would seek to build coalitions through compromise, Trump bypassed the power structure completely and created leverage through his ability to generate an estimated $2 billion in free media coverage. We touched on that, but the number is $2 billion. He was also able to leverage his name recognition from The Apprentice and so many years in the public eye. And lastly, he was able to utilize his growing grassroots support among many Republican voters. So Trump's strategic understanding of media as a negotiation tool was unmatched compared to his rivals. He systematically converted media attention, even the negative coverage, into leverage, and that leverage turned into power, and ultimately that power turned into dominance, because as he surged through the polls, his leverage transformed into power, and he didn't need to persuade the RNC to get on board. He dominated them and forced their compliance. They simply had no choice but to submit. And so the Republican Party looks very different. It is not traditional conservatism anymore. This is the MAGA Republican Party, and it wasn't through persuasion, it was through the dominate and distance strategy. And the part of this that just looms so large in my mind is the Ted Cruz story in all of this. I don't know if you remember this, but it perfectly illustrates this dynamic and the humiliating level of subordination Trump can achieve through domination rather than persuasion. If you remember, during the primaries, Cruz was a fierce opponent who Trump publicly humiliated. Trump went as far as to directly insult the appearance of Ted Cruz's wife, if anybody, ever. I could not. That's unbelievable, right? But then what happened? Let's fast forward a few months. So remarkably, when Trump secured the nomination, Ted Cruz was not only supporting Donald Trump, but was literally making phone calls on his behalf. Just consider how profoundly humiliating it would be to make campaign calls for someone who publicly insulted your spouse's appearance. It's unbelievable, right? But this wasn't achieved through persuasion or collaboration. It was pure dominance through leverage and power, a textbook demonstration of the dominate and distance approach. The Republican establishment was utterly unprepared for this strategy. They came equipped for a conventional political negotiation, but faced an entirely different framework of dominance. This case connects directly back to the Plaza Hotel, right? Trump's earlier career-building status through high-profile real estate deals, even the ones that were financially unsuccessful, created the foundation for The Apprentice, which gave him the potential name recognition that became his crucial leverage point to succeed in these elections. His long-term approach of accumulating leverage through status, even if their financial setbacks, positioned him perfectly to dominate in the election, dominate the primaries, and then win the election, I should say. So here's the conclusion. Regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump, whether you love him or whether you hate him or fall somewhere in between, few that do, but there is one thing that is consistent: his dominate and distance strategy works. Not ethically, not diplomatically, not morally, but strategically. For his goals, as he states them, it is a form of high stakes dominance that has been remarkably effective. It is a high risk, high reward mentality. And you recognize when he's taking those big risks, he takes some big losses. Like he lost money on the Plaza Hotel. He's had multiple bankruptcies, right? But it doesn't matter because his strategy is not just based in dominance, but also relentlessness as well. One of the things for me as a negotiator, I get good deals. I wouldn't be where I am without it. And I take pride in the fact that I still have good relationships with the people that I negotiate with. I can't think of one person on the other side of a negotiation, like a business negotiation, that I couldn't call right now and have a cordial, friendly relationship with or call with, right? But with Trump, I don't think he could say the same thing. The other people who are on the other side of the negotiation, they do not like these strategies. They don't like these tactics. And a lot of times they might not like him. And Donald Trump does not care. It's a completely different approach. Completely different approach. And now I'm not advocating for this. I'm just, again, this is not just for your offensive usage where you could say there are elements of this that I could incorporate ethically within my negotiation approach, but also defensively. I need you all to understand what else is out there and how other people might interact, right? So this is really important to keep in mind. Here's a very, very important point. In order to execute a strategy like this, you need to have significant power and leverage, and you need to be relatively certain that that power and leverage they're going to last into the future. Because the thing is, once the tables turn, people are going to come swinging. They're going to come back, right? So most people, most of us here don't have that kind of complete level of power where we could execute a strategy like this safely. So it's one of those approaches where it's like, hey, it's good to know that it's out there, but most likely, even if you wanted to execute it, you probably couldn't in the same way that he could, just because he's on a completely different level. All right. And one last note before we wrap up. I'm tired. This trip was really long, and I think I was over ambitious with setting up this studio and doing this recording before prepping for my keynote tomorrow. And listen, if you made it this long, give me a like and subscribe just for the effort. And let me know what you think. Tell me what other things that we missed, because I'm sure there are things that we missed. We tried to be as robust with the research that we did, but of course, there are going to be things that were missed. So let's keep this conversation going. Keep an eye out for the next video, and want to evaluate the tariff negotiation strategies. And yeah, thanks for listening. Appreciate you. Have a good one. I'll catch you later.